On behalf of W4W Foundation team, may I welcome you all to another session of Wednesdays for Water. Wednesdays for Water, as you know, is a water conversation series towards understanding better the nuances of water conservation and management. The objective is to engage with water experts, policymakers, grassroots practitioners, and particularly youth to learn their thoughts, ideas about the complex issues associated with water and the possible solutions. You will be glad to know that we have expanded to have more activities because Wednesdays for Water sessions were really getting full for 2 months in advance. So we have expanded to more activities like Friday Waters, where we invite water work thesis, book reading, do water arts talking, as well as movies and documentaries. We have also started interacting with Women for Water on Mondays. So basically, we have just spread the Wednesdays talking to more water. We are also organizing now conference panels, workshops across schools to get the conversation going also on the ground. Please visit the website www.w4w.in for more details. Today, I'm very delighted that we have Professor Harini Nagendra to discuss water smart cities as social-ecological systems. Commons. Harini is a well-known name in the field of social ecological systems, such as lakes, forests, fisheries, and you just name it. And interestingly, we also share a commons mentor, Nobel laureate, late Professor Elinor Ostrom from Bloomington School, where we have the Ostrom's workshop. So we both are Ostrom scholars. It is great to have you, Harini, today. And may I now invite Megha to do a quick introduction to Harini, and then we go ahead with the discussion of the subject today. Thank you, Megha.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome, everyone. Harini Nagendra is the Director of Research Center at the Azim Premji University and leads the university's Center for Climate Change and Sustainability. She has received many awards, including the 2009 Cozzarelli Prize from the US National Academy of Sciences, the 2013 Elinor Ostrom Senior Scholar Award, and the 2017 Clarivate Web of Science Awards. She has written extensively, to name a few books: Nature in the City, Bengaluru in the Past, Present and Future, The Cities and Canopies, Trees of Indian Cities, and the most recent one is The Bangalore Detectives. She has over 150 research publications and writes a monthly column, The Green Goblin, in the Deccan Herald newspaper. She's a well-known public speaker and writer in issues of urban sustainability in India. She's also an associate editor of the journal Global Environmental Change. She is among the lead authors of the IPCC AR5 reports and on the advisory board of several committees. Her interest lies in urban sustainability, ecology and development, land change, biodiversity and conservation. The detailed bio will be available for everyone in the chat box. Over to you, ma'am. Please, you can start the session now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Megha. So as we are going to discuss water smart as social ecological commons, let me just quickly take you through very well-known definition also coming up from the Ostrom workshop and scholars. Leading among them is Harini, who is with us today. The concept of social ecological system goes to an ecological system intricately linked with and affected by social systems within which this ecological system is located. When we talk about ecological system, we are broadly talking about interdependent systems of natural or biological units, and you will be learning more about it from Harini because her background is from biology. Then when we talk about a social system, it broadly means that we, the individuals, we tend to form groups or like-minded groups, and we develop interdependent relationships with each other to make decisions and take actions on issues that influence us as well as the surrounding ecology. An important aspect in this is the interlinking of social and ecological systems, where each have their own systems in their own merits. So as a culture of our session, Wednesdays for Water, let me ask you a question from where you can take on the further conversation, Harini. Having worked on social ecological systems, how do you visualize and how people like us should materialize the idea of integrating ecological systems. And here we are focusing more on the water systems in the city building process to attain sustainable or smart or rather resilient cities. Do you think the water smart cities through integrated urban water systems will ever see the light of the day in our society? Over to you, Harini, and welcome again. And thank you so much for taking us time for us.
Thank you so much, Mansi. It's such a nice thing to see these regular conversations about water happening. And I think this is exactly the kinds of things that we need. So I think one of you to stop sharing. Yes, okay. So let me just start then. Okay, so this is my with this with thank you to the team for that very generous introduction. I hope I can live up to it. Here's a discussion on water smart cities and ecological commons. And I wanted to start with a bit of a background. As Mansi mentioned, I am an ecologist and I moved from looking at forests to cities about 15 years ago now, more than 15 years ago. Before that, my work was almost exclusively more focused on forests. And the reason that prompted me was thoughts like this, that we are already a world that is more than 50% urban. By 25%, by 2050, we'll be a world that is 75% urban. India itself is expected to cross the 50% urban mark sometime in 2050, about there. This is a map of the largest and fastest, actually the fastest growing cities in the world and the largest cities. So the yellows and the reds, which are the fastest growing cities in the world, if you focus, you can see clearly it's India, China, and a cluster in Africa, right? So these are the fastest growing areas in the world. But urbanization in India, countries like India, is very different from urbanization in the process of the Western countries in multiple ways. You know, for instance, here's a nightlight satellite image. And what you can see from here is blue is, this is from Esri, blue is area cities that are expanding. Pink and red gives you a sense of the cities that are actually shrinking. So this is the eastern part of the US, where Texas and many places like that are, and this is India. And you can see in India, cities are basically expanding on a complete expansion trajectory. In many parts of the US, you have industrialized, especially cities like Detroit and other manufacturer-centered cities shrinking. Similarly, in Europe, if you look at the literature on urbanization, there's a lot of literature on shrinking cities and what do you do with de-urbanization. We have a very different problem in India of expanding cities. And we also have to think of the larger picture of what does this do to the countryside. You can see the lights here, and this is a very good image of telling you where is the footprint of cities. You know, the actual physical coverage of cities is maybe 2 to 4%, 5%, depending on how you define a city. 2 to 4% of the land cover of India is cities. But the spread, you look at all these lights. Who turns on lights at night? Only the urban footprint. So because you have cities, you need large roads to connect them. Because you have the large roads, the footprint of the city extends into the countryside. And the waste from the city is dumped out into the countryside. The energy is guzzled from distant rivers. So those distant landscapes are impacted. The farmers in those landscapes are impacted. And then there are industries that feed us and that supply food and supply clothes, and then the dyes that they put. So a city, in short, pulls in resources from across India and sends its waste across India. And so the footprint is much larger and the impact is much larger than the physical surface of the city. And the kind of context in which cities of the global south, what we call developing countries in a different language, has always been very different in the background context. And what do I mean by background context from the West? So this is a paper we did in 2018 for nature sustainability. And you can see that the urban growth has always been higher. The green is the T, DG, and LDC is the transition developing and least developed economies. So basically the global south, places like India. And you can see that the green is always higher than the blue, which means the growth in population. This is the log percentage on the left. Some of you who get that math will understand that it really means that the population growth in global south in cities is much higher, because the log is actually reducing it, so we can see it in the same graph. It's actually significantly higher than it is in the global north, and it has been that way from the 1970s onward. It's not a recent phenomenon. We tend to think of it as urbanization is recent, but the growth of cities has always been it's a huge magnet in places like India, because where do people go who have no other place? they go to the city. The social and the environmental contexts are also different, as we showed. This is now divided across region. You can see North America, we put the global north together. So North America, Europe, Australia, and Japan together in one plot. Then you have Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And what I want to show you here is that continentally, everything is different from the overall global south to north is different. And by continents also, it's different. So youth unemployment rates are much higher in the global south. Underfarm mortality rates are high. Poverty rates are high. Number of slum households are high. They don't have access to water and sanitation. They live in very polluted air. PM concentrations are high. Low internet access. Low illiteracy rate. So everything, if you want to make a sustainable city, you want to make a smart city, you know, talking about internet rates, where is the context? While inequities are high, the disadvantages are high, the infrastructure is broken, the financial capacity is not there, the technical capacity is not there, the institutional capacity is not there. So what are we talking about when we talk about urban sustainability? We can't just import a solution from the West into our cities and make it work. And yet we are doing exactly that. So we did a study on, in 10-year period, from 2008 to 17, what are the papers published in urban sustainability and what are the top cited papers? So look at 1,000 different papers. So this is not a statistical error, you know, 1,000 is a large pool. The top 1,000 cited papers over an entire decade. 34.3% come also of this 10,000. Of this 1,000, 343, that is 34.3% come from North America. Another 36.9% come from Europe. So you see already 70% of our data, the top cited, that means most influential journals, 70% come from North America and Europe. And remember, I showed you the fast expanding cities are not in those contexts. What does India have? 10. So that is 0.1% of our research. China is an exception. They do a lot of homegrown research. They have cities that are in a peculiar context of their own. They manage cities in a different way. So let's take China out of the picture. Other countries like the global India-like context, South Africa, India, other global south countries, it's still 0.5%. We've gone from 0.1 to 0.5%. So how can we ever hope to have research that fits our context if this is the kind of background that we see? By 2050, what are we going to deal with? Some projections say that India will have 60% urban population. Some say it's 50%. We will add 415 million people. Okay, so every hour already 1,800 people move to our cities, and Delhi, Mumbai, and Kolkata between them already have will have 100 million people by 2050. Just think of the scale of that: 100 million people in 3 cities. Where are these cities going to function? And it's no surprise then that if you look at a city like Chennai, this is just a Google Earth image from 1984 to 2018, and I'm giving you this because Chennai floods, and we've been hearing so much about the Chennai floods, the loss of life, the loss of property. Look at this, the kinds of wetlands that you had in 1984. I've just given a couple of them: large lakes, water bodies, wetlands, marshy areas, all completely cleared because of urban growth. So the Chinese have a concept, actually a traditional Chinese concept, that they are reviving called sponge cities. And the idea is that a wetland is like a sponge. What does it do in a city like Chennai, which is a coastal city and gets a lot of floods, a lot of rainfall in an intense period? It soaks up the water, excess water during the rainy period, and it releases it during the dry period. Otherwise, why would a city be in a strange position where it has floods in the monsoon and drought in the summer? It should actually percolate. There's no chance to percolate because we've removed the sponges. We have the concrete and the water runs off. This is the situation in Madras. This is the situation in Bombay. If you look at Bombay, it's a city that's going to face sea level rise. And it's also one of the cities that had the first climate action plan, which they very recently developed. They are building concrete barriers for the sea. What they have is a very good natural barrier, which is the mangroves. And they're removing the mangroves for the city's Navi Mumbai second airport. Why does the city need a second airport? Or even if it needs a second airport, why does it need it at the expense of mangroves, which are already a protective barrier? And then you will cut down that and then build these cement walls. And funnily enough, it's very unlikely that this airport will actually last for 20 years even after this built, because that's the area that's going to face flooding. So economically, it doesn't make sense. We talk about pitting ecology against development, and it's not divisive at all. In fact, the very clear to us is that you cannot have development without ecology, especially in the time of climate change. Right? But what I want to really argue for in this talk is that we think it's inevitable. We automatically think that cities have to grow, people have to develop, and that means urban bodies will be destroyed. And I want to challenge this by a case study of Bangalore and show that this, what we think of as the inevitable, was not the way the city grew for centuries. It's only something that we've been thinking of in the last century or so. So this is the story of the urban water bodies in Bangalore. The black line is the BBMP, or the Brihat Bengaluru Mahanagara Palika, that is the municipality's boundary. And the water bodies within the city are marked with blue, and the dark blue, and the ones outside with the light blue. As many parts of Peninsular South India, this is a semi-arid area. Bangalore is in the rain shadow of the Western Ghats. It doesn't get much water. What did people do? They built these irrigation tanks, and which we call lakes now, and they connected them topographically. So there are actually 3 different valleys, and they go, the ones on the left side go to the Vishabhavati Valley, and they connect to the Arkavati, and then eventually to the Kaveri. The 2 watersheds on the right feed into the same chain, which goes into the what is we call the river Pen in Tamil Nadu, which eventually goes out to the other side. So one goes this to a river on the west side, and one goes to a river on the right side. But there are no perennial sources of water in Bangalore, no perennial sources. And it's very interesting because there are megalithic stone tombs that tell you that 3,000 years ago there were people here. So what were they doing? How did they manage our perennial sources of water? We have no idea. However, we do know that there are inscription stones and copper plates found across this region that tell you that people were there in this area, and these people actually created these water bodies or lakes, that they've left inscriptions behind. There's an inscription that talks about how they constructed the lake, but we also know who constructed it. They were not just kings, they were local people. One person said that she constructed the lake it was a woman, for the support of animals, cattle, birds, living beings in the service of the goddess Ganga. One man says in order that her husband and other relatives for 21 generations might get merit in the afterlife. Another man wants dharma for his father. So there were those people, and then there were the kings. There are the other inscriptions that talk about the kings. And there are inscriptions that tell you how they did it. Somebody went into the area, they scooped out the mud, and they removed the jungle, and they deepened the area. And with this water, they then created the wetlands which grew paddy, and the rice was given to the temple gods. So what I want to point your attention to is that as people moved to new areas in this landscape, they created these lakes or tanks. They knew they needed water, and so our logic that when populations grow, they destroy water bodies is not true. People in those times knew that as you moved into a place, you needed water. You needed shade. They also planted trees. So those are the things they did. They improved the landscape from the view of what people need in terms of social-ecological services. You also see then that, okay, then we know 1537 Kempegowda came in, and the market city of Bangalore was created. And then we don't have too many records. We have a lot of myths and stories about what Kempegowda did, but no factual, nothing that we can really cite. But Shivaji's father Shadi came along with the Bijapur Sultanate and took over Bangalore for some time, and he had it as a Jagir. And his court poet wrote this poem called Shiva Bharat, and he describes Bangalore in the 1640s, which they call Bingrur. And you can see the description where they talk about the city teemed with deep lakes, each house graced by a well, fountains gurgled at every square spouting a fine mist. The city had trees thick with flowers and shade. It was girdled by a bottomless moat, glimmering with water, and dotted with countless lakes, each as big as a sea. And Shadi ruled in this paradise like Indra. This idea of big as a sea is also there in many of the Bangalore lakes and their names. They're called Sandra, Junna Sandra, Malla Sandra, Singa Sandra. Many of these Sandras are no longer there. I mean, you know that the name of the locality is something Sandra, there should be a lake. What is Sandra? Sandra is actually Samudra. It's a corruption of Samudra, which is a large body of water. So this idea of countless lakes as big as a sea, that's the same imagery with which these water bodies were created. This continued, you had Kempegowda and his dynasty. They created lakes. So for instance, his mother was supposed to have asked him to create this lake called Siddhikatte, which is now the site of the KR market, which is one of the oldest markets in town. Then came the Mysore kings, they came Tipu Sultan, Hyder Ali, then Tipu Sultan. And each time during a war, for instance, when the Marathas fought Hyder or Marathas fought Tipu, both sides would burn the places, breach the lakes, poison the wells because they were trying to stop the other army. But the first thing you did when you got peace was Hyder or Tipu or whoever the Mysore kings would actually restore the water bodies and build new ones. So this tradition continued even when the British took over Bangalore for the first time after the Third Anglo-Mysore War in 1791. And of course, the first thing the British do is always make maps and write down notes of a place. So they did that, and we have this sense of the. I put cantonment, but obviously the cantonment did exist in 1791. It was built in the 1820s. But just to give you a boundary of where the cantonment is, where the Pete is, that's the old part of the city. That's where the original part of the city where Hyder and Tipu's old part of the city, and there's a fort in which the king lived. So that was that area. The British later expanded to the cantonment, but you can see the number of water bodies in this area. And they're large, and they're so large because they were created to actually bring water to people. The city then grew. The British built their cantonment here and they added more people. And as they added more people, they did two things. They planted more trees and they created more lakes because you need more water. How are you going to grow, expand the city without water bodies? So they did this continuously till they reached a point in the about 1990 or thereabouts, the Sankey tank, that is the last tank that was built by the city by a person called Colonel Sankey, who was part of the British administration. Finally said, look, that's it, we've run out of space. I can't build any more places because everywhere else, either there's no low-lying land or it's occupied by people. So now you have a peculiar problem where the water surface of these water bodies are fixed, but people still continue to come into the city. At this point, the government had a choice, and Bangalore was an interesting state because it's a princely state. It's not directly controlled by the British. However, one part of it was governed by the British. Another part of it was governed by the Mysore king. So the cantonment area was ruled by the British. The rest of the area was controlled by the Mysore king. And so the Mysore king decided to get piped water from 3 distant lakes on the Arkavati basin, bring it into the city. And then the British said, can you do it for us also? That is, get piped water into the whole city. So replace the entire water supply. And in exchange, we will give you. So one of the lakes, Sambangi Lake, was given over by the British to the Mysore king. But that's important because what the city could have done was supplemented the local water supply with extra supply from the outside. Instead, they replaced local supply with the water from the outside. What does that mean? You have lost your local social-ecological loop of dependence because you no longer depend on the water coming into your area for your own use. And almost immediately you see the change. We look at archival documents a lot, and Hita Krishnan, my PhD student, has spent a lot of time looking at this in her work. So what you will see in these documents is that previously people, so every lake had a goddess, a water goddess, a lake goddess, and she was worshipped. Whenever the lake overflowed, there would be Ganga Puja, so they would float a boat in the middle of the lake with a goat and rice, and there would be feast after that. All of these traditions disappear. Wells were worshipped every year. These sacred stones at the lake were worshipped every year. Suddenly, people start saying lakes are malarial, they're swampy, they're diseased, we should fill them in. They start, the plague comes soon after that in 1892-93, and people are worried about being discovered with a corpse at home because then you get sent away to a plague camp and you might not come back. It's the same kind of thing we've had with COVID recently, where people are worried about being taken away to these government camps. But what happens there is to avoid being seen with a corpse, people start throwing wells into the corpse. And all of us know from the Indian tradition that once you've thrown a dead body into a well, you've defiled it. It's a spiritual idea of purity that is gone now, which means you don't really intend to use that well anymore. So wells, lakes, these become anti-social areas of disease. Ronald Ross, who later got his Nobel Prize for discovering the relationship between the malarial virus and the mosquito. So he was in Bangalore and he was the health officer, and he, during the outbreak of plague, looked at the old part of the city and it's extraordinarily unsanitary and got a lot of changes done. So the structure of the inner part of the city is very similar to what we see today, and it was done for sanitation because the idea was these lakes are unsanitary places. And so it goes on that water bodies start disappearing, that if you look at 1888 again, I'll go back to 2015, except for that the lake in the heart of the city also, lake is half of its original size. I'll go back to 1888, you can see it's larger. In 2015, it's smaller. So even also Lake has shrunk to half its size, and the rest of the lakes are gone, except for the periphery of the city, as I showed you in the earlier map, where we still have water cells. So this is still the cantonment, that is the old part of the city. Almost all the water bodies have gone, and what have they gone in to be converted into? A sports stadium, a mall, a housing complex, the usual kinds of areas which are built spaces because they're supposed to be wastelands and they were of no value to anyone. What has happened in recent years? So we lost this local loop, everything went downhill, except about 10-15 years ago, the peripheral part of the city, which still has its water bodies, people moved in very large numbers, and there was no pipe water, there was no Kaveri water. So you had pipes, but what would happen is you would have pipes to a central tank, and the tank would be filled with from a tanker. The tanker would get its water from underground, from a bore. And the city started running out of bore water. So bore wells were dug deeper and deeper and deeper. Bangalore had a well culture. So another paper that Hita and I and another colleague did, we showed that till even the 1970s, the city had about 1,500 open wells across the old part of the city. And now we could find barely 4 or 5, and none of them were active. So S. Vishwanath, who runs an NGO called suddenly forgetting the name, but Bio, yes. Yeah, has run a very interesting campaign called A Million Wells, and he's trying to really restore wells across Bangalore in partnership with a number of groups. So now you see a revival of the open well concept. But because communities started seeing that their water table was linked to the lakes, they actually got together to do lake revival. And so you see other kinds of new environmentalism. And because of that, for instance, a lake close to my house, which I was closely involved with, Kaikondali Lake, which was a swampy area, was restored between 2007 and 2010. And now is a beautiful space that attracts over 100 different species of birds. Pelicans were missing for a very long time, and pelicans are back. And not just that, we have been able to work with the BBMP to say that they are hydrological entities that are interconnected. So you must work with them as such. And so the entire chain of 7 lakes that were interconnected have all been restored together, which is really what you need, because otherwise if you restore a lake without doing upstream and downstream restoration, you are essentially impairing the water flow, and this lake will again become a dead lake, so to speak, over time. And so that has been done. But it's been done in a very technical way. For instance, the BDA, the Bangalore Development Authority, does a lot of lake restoration in Bangalore. And they typically do this lake restoration in a particular way where they are focusing on it as a soup bowl, an engineering approach. So the deepest point is in the center. The shallow points are all around. And this is bad for siltation. This is bad for the movement of water. And this also means that a little bit of sewage, which you'll always have in every Indian city, leads to eutrophication. And so you have algae, green, the salvia and the other green plants covering the surface of the lake. And then you have fish death because it completely blocks the oxygen. Whereas all these lakes or water bodies, because they were desilted every year and they were these natural places that we have now turned into static sort of places where you restore them once every few years. The inlet was shallow, the outlet was deep, and it gradually increased in depth, and which meant the biodiversity was of a particular kind, because the shallow place had certain kinds of wading birds, the deep water area had these trees with the large raptors, and it also meant that the water flow would be protected, and the wetland upstream where the water came in would clean up some of the sewage naturally. This was also urban commons where women washed their clothes, where people grazed their cows and their goats, and people foraged for food. So we did a study. People ask in Bangalore, why do you care about foraging? You should ban all this. And all these restored lakes, they ban people from doing this. But these are social-ecological spaces. We found in a survey of just 200 women from low-income families, half of them bought forage species and would like to forage more, but they've been thrown out of the lakes. And they knew about 76 species, just these 200 women, from a very, very nice diversity. So we're actually putting together a book, Seema Mondoli, Ranjini, Dhriti, and Rohit and I, which is called Chasing Sopu. Sopu is what you call greens in Bangalore. Think, what are these greens? Where do you get them from? People also depend on the lakes for play, for mental health, for worship, for resilience, for dhobi ghats, for cows to graze. And these cows are extraordinarily important because you get sewage. You look at the grass in the back. Every lake will get sewage. Now, having a sewage treatment plant is not going to rid your lake of nitrogen and phosphorus. Even if you treat that, you will still have nitrogen-enriched water coming in, which means you have grasses and weeds. unless you have the cows in, you're going to take this expensive machinery and keep it on, every 2-3 years you have to remove that from the lake, and that leads to bird death. But you just have cows, let them come in and graze. And so we don't think of these because we're still enamored with the Western model of smart cities. And it's such an interesting, I don't want to touch too much on smart cities, but I can in the discussion. We had some students go across the smart cities in Karnataka to try to understand how they had plans for restoration a couple of years ago. And the first focus they had was all consultants who came from the outside who didn't know the context. But the first context was, for instance, in Mangalore on the beach, looked at the cows and said, we should throw out the cows and bring in the tourists. But are cows also keeping your beaches clean? Yes, they are in very fundamental ways. And now they've become part of that wetland ecology. And as we see in Bharatpur, you throw out the cows and we destroy the local ecology. We also found that lakes are very important places for imagination. We complain that our cities are full of migrants and migrants don't care about the city. And we complain in all cities across India, we have this idea of this is my city. You should have Kannadigas in Bangalore, you should have Marathi speaking people in Bombay. All of these, language constraints that we should have only my people. That's not going to happen. We know our cities are nodes of migrants. And whether wealthy migrants or poor migrants, the catch is how do you make them integrate into the city and feel that it's their city. And what we found is these restored lakes, from a study of 3 or 4 lakes, are such nodes of what we call environmental placemaking. Once people visit the lake, they feel it's theirs. They see a bird, they see a tree, something that they knew in their neighborhood. And from the migrant workers above to this lady below to transgender people to parents of special needs children, they all say now it's my city. And we found that people who meet at the lake now get involved with traffic movements, with with sustainable waste, with providing food to Anganwadis, to all kinds of things because they met at a lake and they feel it's their city. Right? But we don't understand this. Our water bodies which are restored look like this. They have these fences, they keep the cows out, they keep the goats out, they keep the fishermen out. And the fishermen are the main allies. They say no plucking, no swimming, no use of the lake, no interaction with the lake. And once you throw, we have seen that fishermen are your biggest allies because if they have their fish in the lake, they are the ones who are there at night monitoring any dumping of the lake or any illegal activity. Also, imaginations of the lake. We want Bangalore to be Singapore, so you don't want grazers. But of course, you can't maintain Bangalore like Singapore. You must have our own indigenous ways of maintaining. This also translates then into our smart city or our climate change action plans, urban action plans. So smart city is one part of it that I spoke about. But if you look at the IPCC report, you can see that India is going to have heat waves, extra flooding events, drought events, all kinds of extreme events. And we looked at what are the climate resiliency plans across the Indian cities. And while all of them talk about nature-based solutions, they don't solicit local communities' opinions on that. They're not really decentralized. They're really largely based on modeling, and they don't at all focus on equity or issues of the poor. They don't focus on gender. There's a lot that is left out. So what we really need is a very context-specific approach that actually talks to people living around these areas. I want to end with a very nice, therefore, what should be an ecologically smart city in India? I think we talk so much about smart cities, but really, I think to be really smart, it's not technology that's the need. You need ecology to be a wise city or a smart city. And Rohit was his undergraduate student when he worked with us and on the foraging project, and also an excellent artist. So this, I think, is a lovely vision from him of the smart city. We have, yes, people jogging and walking, but also women foraging and people playing and street vendors and parents and children and wooded groves and all kinds of other places, right? So, sorry, this is, I think, some left. Yes, I just want to show you Kaikondali Lake after restoration and end with a slide of Eleanor Ostrom, yes, visiting a few months before she passed away and planting a jackfruit tree at Kaikondali Lake. So with that, I'll stop and ready for questions.
It was good to see Lynn at the last slide to put the discussion going, and particularly the way you were discussing about how people can self-organize, and she brings that example very closely. Thank you so much, Harini. Thanks for the enlightening session. Many of us are really struggling to understand these points, although a lot of people in academia do relate with what you are saying. And you beautifully started with de-urbanization, and then you talked about how we struggle in our capacity in all kinds of ways, and at the same time we continue to destabilize our ecology. Very interesting point raised by you that traditionally when people were making their habitats, they were building water bodies and planting more trees, and we are just doing opposite while we are becoming smarter. We are cutting the trees and we are filling up the lakes to make our beautiful mansions. So this is very, very interesting, and I think everyone here can relate that. It was also interesting when you really raised the point that how water epidemics can become a very important point to really look at those things, and even water availability or security for that matter. And good that you brought Roth in the discussion and start linking how mosquitoes, malarias, and water bodies are also related, and that water bodies should flow. And then you also talked about the well initiative, and of course we all look at actually Bangalore as a case study example where people's movement related to water conservation and management has been instrumental. And in fact, people talk about is if Bangalore can do, why can't we do? So this has been a very common discussion, especially I can relate that with Ahmedabad when people ask this question. And we go back to the whole lesson what Ostrom used to teach us, that how communities make a huge difference in the way cities are built. I think another important point when you started talking more about this whole smartness, we had a discussion at the background of this session on smart cities or smart water bodies or smart approach. You did mention very well that the technical approach we take is really taking away the whole ecological beauty and even making it exclusionary for the people who can keep the lakes and the water bodies better. For example, the animals, the poor people who run their livelihood out of it. So often I do feel that making it exclusive is becoming exclusionary. And yes, I'm looking forward to your forthcoming book with this beautiful, I hope this sketch comes in from Rohit. And we will really look forward to reading those books and articles from you. You have been writing exceptionally well on nature and cities and all kinds of things. So I have a lot of questions, but I can discuss with you anytime I wish to. I have that liberty with you. But let us give the moment to all the participants who have been listening to you. So thanks all the participants. And we can take all your questions one by one. I see some questions are posed here in the chat box. So maybe we start with the chat box questions. And may I invite Arun? Your question is there, but would you like me to read the question, or you would like to take the question by yourself? Arun, are you still around? Arun Krishnan.
Thank you, Mansi ji, and
Sure.
thank you, ji, for this illuminating talk. So I was looking at some use cases from the West, and also from Latin America, where they are actually harvesting water from moisture in the air. I'm sorry, this doesn't relate directly to lakes, but still, because you're an expert in water, I thought I could pose this question. Like for example, in Peru, indigenous communities are harvesting water by putting a mesh on mountains, which are foggy, and they're harvesting water from there. And of course, US, being a very they're looking always for machine-based solutions. They have machines which harvest water, right? For $10,000 or $20,000, you can get a machine which gives you a family need for water for a day. So I'm just wondering whether, with the lakes shrinking, water bodies becoming more scarce, whether in India also these techniques will be required in the next decade and going forward. Thank you.
Very interesting question. This is not my area, so I'm speculating, but I really cannot just think of, if you do this at a large scale, where will the water be left in areas to have cloud formation? Already what we do know for climate change is that cities are, for the first time in the past 5-6 years, we've seen studies that cities are modifying their microclimate. It actually rains less in areas around cities because of two things. One is that you've cut down the trees, and the other is you have so much concrete. So what we are doing is we have an urban heat island effect. We all know about this, right? Because you get heat waves with the concrete. But what concrete also does is it dries up the air and reduces the humidity. Trees increase humidity, concrete, air above concrete is less humid. And because of that, it rains less around city already. So if you're taking the scarce area and trying to use cloud seeding as the Karnataka government has been doing, some other governments have been doing, I'm not sure how sustainable that is. In Peru, in a mountain area, these are very moist mountains. These are these moist tropical forests, which are also called cloud forests, because they're really, it's like the forest is always in a cloud. Doing that is one thing. But trying to do it in an environment where you need more moisture in the air because you're not getting rainfall, this is not, to me, the way to go, because I think this actually will exacerbate. It's like air conditioning. We all use air conditioners because we're desperate. But what we're doing is we're making the air outside much hotter. And therefore, this is what is the vicious trap that we call the wicked trap, as many people talk about it in urban theory. And what you're setting up is this wicked trap in which it's impossible to then come out of the cycle.
Yeah, thank you. I think Arun has a smart technology thing, and we may try, but ecology and landscape will be also a concern to look at, to adapt. Thanks. Neha, would you like to ask the question? And please try to be brief, just straight to the question, and we can leave the background. Okay, thank you so much. For all the participants, please try to be brief so that we can reach out to all of you and Harini can take them. Thank you. Neha.
Yeah, thanks, Mansi. I had a quick question. We have a lot of scientific knowledge. We have academia, who knows ecologically what to do, what not to do, how to go about doing it. We also have a local indigenous expertise, people who have been living in close proximity to the water bodies, be it lake or rivers. But somewhere down the line, there is a gap between what needs to be done, what is being done, and what can be done. So my question is that, how can we bridge this gap to make it mainstream or to institutionalize the conservation and protection of water bodies? And what is the role of academia towards this?
Very, I think, all critical questions here. I can just give you some experiences of mine. This is by no means an exhaustive list. But what I find is, as an academic, finally, maybe what we should be doing is not trying to focus on unique knowledge that is paper-worthy. It's very simple knowledge that local people lack. For instance, some of our most influential work in the city has been very simple. Somebody wants to cut, they say 500 trees for a flyover. We go and do an independent count and an independent environmental impact assessment. Invariably, we find that instead of 500 trees, 1,000 trees are going to go. Instead of 1,000 trees, 5,000 trees are going to go. We publish a little report, which is a university report, which, and courts use this in PIS. When people, so there's an independent assessment. Okay, the government sometimes comes to us because they also know that their statistics are wrong. So this is not an anti-government stand by any chance. But I'm just trying to tell you, this is the kind of information that we need. Similarly, we work with the BBMP Lakes department very closely, and they didn't have old topo sheets and GIS maps. So we gave them the maps, because what do? They don't have the technical capacity. They usually have these budgets that are released and they give it to fancy French agencies or other agencies who will generate the maps, keep the data with them saying it's proprietary, and give them PDFs. And they can't see the PDF, so they can't do any analysis. So then we make the maps for them. Okay, or let's say you want to know, the one of the big questions was, do you do dry dredging or wet dredging of lakes? It's a very simple issue. If you do wet dredging, then you don't have to drain the lake and dry it for a couple of years while you do the restoration. The lake is functional, but it costs about 5-6 times as much. So any government with a limited budget, they can do 5-6 times the amount of work with wet dredging. But there was a debate even between ecologists saying that dry dredging is really bad, because a couple of lakes which were dry dredged, the bird species went away. However, those two lakes, road widening also happened, some commercial development also happened. Was it the effect of road widening? Was it the effect of commercial development? So we've done a study that has shown the recovery in Kaikondari Lake and other lakes with wet dredging. We've also with dry dredging, and we've also shown that using eBird data that after lakes were restored in Bangalore, resident species diversity has increased. Migratory species are still gone because they're migrating all the way. I wanted to show the slide that I forgot. the new paper of ours. But resident species diversity. So I think as academia, some of this is publishable, some of this we have to accept will not be publishable. To develop a GIS database of your own neighborhood and give it to citizens, or say, who is the authority that owns your lake? Whom do you approach? Write down their numbers. You know, all of these we can ask students to do, we will not get publications. I think that's the challenge then for academics. If you don't get a scientific publication, then how do you proceed? And so we have to trade off some of this to just do work practically, but we have a lot of data at our hands and capacity, especially through students, to provide this information for which people can use.
Thanks, Harini. I think you also bring a very important point based on which actually the genesis of Wednesdays for Water also came into being, to really decode these hard sciences and bring it to as many people as possible, right from policymakers to youth and all, as well as, you know, motivate people to have this conversation, because those people sitting in the boardroom are probably not having all the opportunities and access to documents, and at the same time people who are working and producing good work do not get the opportunity all the time to have their voice in the boardroom discussions, you know. So it's very important that the conversation goes on. We will move on to the next question. Anirudh, I see you have a long chat and we can read that. Please ask your question very briefly. So because we have questions are queued up. Thanks, Anirudh. Are you still around? Anirudh?
Yes, I am around. My internet's
Please
not so good, but I'll just make it a very short question. So we
Please.
spoke about how there are discriminatory practices in human-lake interactions. So my question is, what should be the role of state in facilitating participation in such a way that we can go beyond these citizens groups and the caste class markers that come with them that decide how we interact with the lakes?
So yes, that's absolutely true. I'm trying to think of how does one go? I mean, your question, I guess, is how do we move away from this, right? So there are, I mean, you're absolutely right. In many cases, it has unfortunately led to this kind of, when you have lake restoration, it is comparable to what we call as gentrification in the West, where you're basically saying that this lake then is for certain uses and not for certain other uses. That said, there have been some places where this has changed. For instance, the Environment Support Group has worked with some lake restoration in Bangalore. ActionAid has worked with a couple of other lake restorations in Bangalore. And as activist or citizen organizations that have a strong focus on equity, they have actually managed to do this in a very different way. Similarly, there are some lakes, for instance, Kalkundali Lake, the one that I showed you. Government rules do not allow grazers, grazing cows to come in and directly graze. But what has been worked out in the via media is that grazers can come in and free of charge cut grass and take it away. And they are actually allowed to bring their bikes so they can actually take heavy loads of grass. Similarly, in Jakkur Lake in the end of the airport, they actually have worked out in the region that grazers can come with their cows. And when the fishermen are close stakeholders in the restoration of the lake. So there are ways in which different organizations are trying to do this. I think there has to be, the biggest challenge for me is not, the biggest challenge is when you plan the restoration itself. These citizen groups or these collecting of opinions from people will always, or not always, but most of the time land up leaving out many people at the wrong end of the caste, gender, all the kinds of discrimination that you go on actually lumped together in one group. So this is our big challenge in cities. How do you actually get a more equitable participation in lake restoration?
I think one of the ways is also to actually get more women on board in the decision making, which is very crucial because their representation is almost not there in water decisions. And another thing, I think people have to also realize those designers and planners and architects who are actually making these decisions on at the behest of government, because government is not actually deciding what to do. They are guided, advised by specialists. So they have to be also taught. And I can tell you from my own background in architecture and planning, there is no education on water, literally no education on water. So we are far from really making them sensitive towards water bodies. And also please understand, more they construct, there is more money which they can justify that this lake development is worth 20 crore or 10 crore or 2 crores, because what Harini is suggesting, or what ecologists and biologists' way of looking at the water body will barely cost 1/10 of the development cost. So rather, local authorities can save that money for future, but that's a long discussion. I just cut it short. But thanks, Priyadarshini, for appreciating the maps, and Gopakumar sir, thank you for appreciating the talk. You have been our regular participant since the very beginning, so thank you for encouraging us. I see Amandeep, you have a very, is it a question or what? Do you want to ask questions? Because I know you are interested to publish also. Would you like to ask question, or you want to give it a pass? Amandeep, are you around? Okay. Okay. Okay, so now I get a chance to ask a question. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, my question is very simple because most of the things are answered, and also we stand on the same side of the ideology. But how do we really get through this whole approach of, I will say, water grabbing in the process of, when you were showing the maps from centuries ago to till date, it is a sheer case of water grabbing. And now you are also seeing across the world, you also use the word de-development in a different notion. And across the world, we are seeing that now water bodies are getting rebuilt, I mean, like we had in our ancient time, as you mentioned. So now when cities like Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Hyderabad, we have lost a lot of our water bodies. Where do you see we can really re-grab or reclaim the water bodies back into the system? Because most of our metro cities are unsustainable, first of all, because they are dependent on a distant water, not on their own water. So how do you go about it?
This is a really difficult question. Whether it's tree planting is the same thing. Where is the place in the heart of the city to plant trees anymore?
No place.
If you've lost our water bodies, we've lost our wetland. The challenge in Bangalore, as in many other cities, the lakes are now simply well protected. The kaluways that connect to the lake, the stormwater drain channels, they are not connected. Then the wetlands are not protected at all. I mean, or very, very poorly protected legally. So if you don't protect the wetland, you starve the lake of water. And so this becomes a real challenge. How are we going to do it? Unless we can actually show people that you can restore these lakes. Mumbai had this. So P.K. Das was an architect in Mumbai that you might know of, right? So they have taken some beaches that were actually reclaimed land from garbage and created very nice urban commons areas. And they have been pushing a consortium of people for a long time. The idea of Mumbai on 2 feet. That if you just link the water channels, Mumbai has no place for open areas. You would get walking paths along these channels, and then you could actually tell people about water. So in Bangalore, there's one of the Kormangala drain areas, which is the multi-cure project. See what happens to it with all of these SUVs. But hopefully, the idea is that this is a good idea that you can actually have walking and cycling paths along the sides of these drains. If you actually have that, people will use them, because you would rather walk and cycle and save yourself being 1.5 hours stuck in traffic. But if you walk and cycle and the drain is polluted, then you will agitate to get it cleaned up. And then so I think we have to start those kinds of things. Start somehow using them, and then get into that catch-22 where you put pressure on the government and say, if nobody goes near those water bodies and they're sticking, who's going to clean them? But that doesn't answer your last question. How do they create large water bodies themselves? I don't know. It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, but you rightly put it on the part of water channels, which we very fondly say as ecologists, but in the land records, they are drains.
Yeah.
And I often keep saying that drains are the nadi system, to keep all the organs fit, just like all the water bodies there. And unfortunately, that's a long way to go, where we can actually de-designate the drains as drains and make them also as part of water systems, because the health of the lakes lies in the health of the drains, natural water channels. I see, Sonia, you have a point here. Would you like to ask or discuss with Harini about it? Sonia Gupta. No, okay. Thanks, Sonia. Is there any other question or questions from my team? I know we all hold back so that participants can ask questions. So anyone from the core team members, Fazia, Bibu, Megha, Vasanta, would you like to ask any question? Okay. Okay, Vishal, you have a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Harini. Nice. Thank you for the nice talk. So I'm just reflecting on the question that was asked about, the role of the academic. So I think, so we are in academic systems where we are evaluated in certain ways. So we get credits for, peer-reviewed scientific publications, but we don't get credits for any time that we spend in the field, working with communities, doing all that dirty work, So in our own way, we have to make certain choices about how we split our time between like scientific publishing or being in the field, mobilizing communities, etc. That was one. Other thing is, you cited a study which said that only 1% of the publications, right, in that journal were from Indian scholars. So I'm just curious why that should be. I don't expect an answer, but is it that not enough Indian scholars are working on these issues? Or is it that we're not able to get into a journal like that? So what would be your thoughts on this?
So let me answer the second question first, because it's easier. Sure. So the second question is, it's not just the Nature Journal. It's basically all cited papers in Google Scholar, Scopus, whatever you call it, Web of Science, or in 10 years, which were top cited, the top 1,000 cited papers. So A, Indian scholars are not publishing enough. B, they're not getting cited enough, which is also another problem.
Yeah.
People might be publishing on India, but not from India. So we are actually looking at both, because we did an analysis of both, whether it's on the place and whether it's from the place. And both ways, however you slice and dice it, this is the same problem. But your first point, see, one of the things we have to do is change that academic system. I am fortunate in a place which is Azim Premji University, which is actually recognizes a lot of this work, not just recognizes, but has an entire team of communication, media, design, etc., that supports this work, right? Because it's a practice-oriented university. That said, I will also say that I think the world is, I think we are still stuck in the old system of thinking of where we can publish. I have done my nature commentaries and my nature sustainability papers, and now I get invitations to all kinds of places because of the practice work, not because of my other work. So actually, journals outside that we consider premier journals are very interested in these. And so, a lot of the work, for instance, the kind of work you do would be absolutely in that area, in that kind of an area. But so we need to figure out how to convince the system around us. And yes, I know the systems are sometimes very hard to navigate in these places. But for instance, Ecology and Society now has a new call for practice. Transdisciplinary work, which is practice oriented, right? So there are journal special issues that are coming, even entire journals that are being launched in these days.
Yeah. And of course, there are like journals on action research itself.
Yes, exactly, which have always been there. Yes. But that side, your point, overall point is true, because the Indian scientific system, at least in the social science system, depends on these journals. That's the currency of promotion. So that is a harder.
Sure. True. Yeah. Right. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Vishal, which is also a point for all of us who are in the transdisciplinary state to really ponder, and also academicians. I mean, would you like your writings to reach more and more people, to be more influential, or would you like it to be only floating around in the peer group? That's a balance you have to make as a citizen, I mean, it's a very tricky balance. I know you write very regularly, even in Deccan Herald, and very, strong write-ups. So it is very important for even if you don't, whether you score points for it or for promotion, that is secondary. But reaching out to more and more people, I think should be our first priority when we are teaching also. But I will leave aside what universities want from teachers. That's not my problem. But I see Karthik Bora, you have a very interesting point. Would you like to ask your point or some suggestion? Because are you still around, Karthik Bora? Professor Karthik Bora? Sorry. Sir, are you still around? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm still around.
Okay, please, sir.
You see, I've been listening to all this with a lot of mixed feelings, because I'm also an ideological person, and we all know how difficult it is to talk to anyone who is not, or even worse, who is highly commercial, highly political, manipulative. And so what I was thinking was, if it is possible to kind of package this whole idea in such a way that it becomes practical, it becomes also viable to communicate to, say, real estate builder, or to say a municipal commissioner, because that is what very smart people do, and they get away with it, and they actually end up subverting the whole original idea, and they become kind of anyway, let's not get into that. But the point is, we need to also take the other side of the ideology, because I think there is nothing wrong with money, and what we need is equality, not scarcity. So that was my point.
Okay, Harini, any reflection on that?
No, I think absolutely. Nothing that is such a valid point. I think those of us who deal with the reality, I always say, with working on water, the action parts that are 95-50 cannot even write about. How to make the negotiations on of what you give up and what you can get, and the political negotiations and the other negotiations that you're making in places, and threats come, and all kinds of things happen on the ground, right? Which one cannot maybe speak about in a public forum very easily. But that is very true. You cannot start with complete ideology and a yes or no to move forward in conservation. You have to make, or any public activity, you have to make allies. And to make allies, sometimes you have to make allies with people who are on the opposite fence from you to get one task done, which maybe you all believe in lake restoration. And you set everything aside for that. And then maybe tomorrow you continue to fight about the other thing. So yes, I completely agree. I think
Thank you. And I think we have to learn that art of organizing people, because that's the most crucial thing. And you made a very valid point when you were talking about that. If people can go around the water body, they feel about it, they can really stand by it when required, because they realize that it is for them. That's very important point, and also very valid point by Karthik Vora sir. And we all know that equality is at the core of doing any actions towards sustainability. I mean, forget ecological sustainability, even social sustainability. We need that as a backbone. Amandeep, you are absolutely right. Actually, if you can manage to connect the dots across India, water bodies are getting now remade. So we are into that phase where we are realizing, and you see across the world, it is now a trend where de-damming is happening, and they are really looking at rejuvenating the old water systems. Yes, Ajit sir, we have to do something to convince, and I will actually encourage more academicians to join the bureaucratic procedure and become leaders, and especially stay sensitive leaders, ecologically sensitive leaders, alongside being smart leaders, let's say it like that. So with this, I think I will call it off for the day, because there are no questions in the chat box. My team members have also not raised their hand. So let me put the thank note for all of you. Thank you all, especially all our participants who have been supporting and encouraging us for now nearly 1.5 years to make Wednesdays for Water meaningful. And thank you so much, Harini, for being with us today as our keynote speaker and enlightening us and taking us through all the question and answers with a lot of motivation, I will say, for all of us. We look forward to having all of you next Wednesday and the Wednesdays to come. Next Wednesday, July 27th, we have a session on artificial intelligence for smart water management. So you may actually see it as a sequel of this session, and the session will be hosted by Professor Fauzia Taranno, our core team member. So we look forward to having you next Wednesday, same time, 5 p.m. Do join us, and please look at the website for more information and the joining link. Thank you all once again. Please take care of yourself, and we see each other very soon. Thank you so much.